Can you hear me? I can't hear you. No, I can't hear, sorry, I can't hear you. Can you hear me? I can do hand signals. I might leave and come back and see if that makes a difference. It's still very quiet. I tested my audio too before I came back on again. So, yeah. I just sent my phone number. Oh, you've all got my phone number now. Hello. Great. Yep. 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 Okay, so we started discussions on a joint committee or a governance option when we were in the middle of the regional growth framework. So the discussion started about, okay, well, how are we going to govern this? So as was mentioned, we looked at a number of options, and the joint committee was selected for a number of reasons. So a joint committee under the Local Government Act is just like your council meetings. You know, it has public agendas, it has public minutes, people can attend and talk to it. So of all the options we looked at, it probably is the most transparent. So we started that discussion related to the regional growth framework, and a couple of things, I guess, re-emphasise the point about having a joint committee. One is that is the same structure that happens in future-proof smart growth in Greater Christchurch. So ministers, government, you know, pretty much said, you know, for us to be part of a committee with local government and iwi, we need, you know, the joint committee structure is one that we're used to. Sorry, now it's saying my internet connection's unstable. So that was the kind of argument for why the joint committee and not other things. In terms of the regional growth framework, the RMA review that was done at the end of last year is foreshadowing Spatial Planning Act, and it's foreshadowing having a regional joint committee. So essentially, almost exactly the kind of committee we're looking to set up for that. In terms of economic development, that came to this discussion a bit later, but I think the government is also foreshadowing that a bit. So I don't know if any of you remember, but September last year, the government announced a regional spatial partnership fund, so replacing the regional growth partnerships, and essentially looking to fund or co-fund regional economic development planning with regions, so not with councils, but with regions. So having a committee such as this would be useful for that. Yeah, so I guess that's the background of how we got to this. The other options, as the paper said, was either the mayoral forum, which doesn't have any kind of formal status, or a subcommittee of a council, but that's always slightly problematic because it's a subcommittee of someone else. The only other comment, or perhaps two other comments. So one is those resolutions that you have in front of you, that is a standard set that every council needs to sign up to. They are the resolutions that essentially meet the requirements of the Local Government Act for a joint committee. The only one that can be different is the resolution around an alternate. So a council can decide to not have an alternate, for instance. That's not a requirement of the Local Government Act. But other than that, you need to pass exactly that set. And the other thing I was just going to mention is timing going forward. So at the moment, every council is down for either their council or one of their committees of a whole to have this paper by the end of February. And after that, a paper will go to Cabinet to get them endorse the regional growth framework and agree to sign the joint committee. Central government officials quite rightly don't want to send that paper to Cabinet until we're sure we have a joint committee. And also at that same point, we would formally be inviting iwi to nominate someone. So we've had some informal conversations, but we would formally invite them to join the joint committee. That's probably enough background. I can answer any specific questions. Yeah, sorry, I can do that. So I've been the independent project director for the regional growth framework for 18 months or so now, and now I'm leading the work of setting up the joint committee, but to cover all three aspects. Mainly, I guess, because it's useful to have someone who has the tag independent in front of their title, so that again the process looks like it's fair for all. No, I mean, I guess I've already talked about the RMA reform, which is foreshadowing a similar joint committee anyway, looks like. I mean, there is more detail coming out on that reform today, but indications last year in all the discussions I've had with central government officials around the Spatial Planning Act, that joined up central government, local government, iwi joint committee is going to be foreshadowed. Yeah, I mean, I guess the other thing is that, you know, everything your council currently does, it will continue to do. So it's not about saying, you know, it's not about this joint committee doing your spatial planning that you're working on, or, you know, your economic development plan, or, you know, any of those plans. It's about having joined up long-term planning and projects that fall out of that, that central government, local government and iwi have collaboratively worked on, and being able to sit around the table and have that conversation with ministers collectively, rather than yeah, what was previously happening where, you know, 10 councils are running off to see ministers, and yeah, way back, even before that meeting that your mayor was referring to, you know, pretty much the conversation was go away and do this jointly and come back when you've done that. So you might have to repeat the question. Yep, that's better, thank you. Well, I guess based on the clear and consistent signals that, you know, central government ministers and officials have been sending, which is we want to talk at a regional level about the regional issues. You know, and after working with central government officials, for instance, on the regional growth framework for, you know, getting on nigh 2 years, I think we'd all look particularly stupid. I mean, also, I mean, I guess fundamentally, you know, if your council said, well, actually, we don't want to play, and the other 9 did, then, you know, potentially you could end up with a joint committee with 9 councils and central government and iwi. So not only is it, you know, one option being that if a council didn't sign up, that you know, potentially all the other councils would be around the table and not yours, or worse still, you know, central government would be saying in particular, well, actually, we've already got these relationships with places like Hamilton, Auckland, Greater Christchurch and Western Bay of Plenty, and we'll just focus on those. To put not too fine a point on it. You need the phone, sorry. That's all right. Yep. Yep. That might be, I can answer your question in part, but because I don't work for Greater Wellington and I haven't been setting the rate, I might have to come back to you on part of the answer. But So at the moment, Greater Wellington have $600,000 in their draft LTP. 400,000 of that is already a rate that is currently rated for the Wellington Regional Strategy Office. So your residents are already paying part of that. 200,000 is new money essentially, and I would imagine that however they've been rating the 400,000, they'll now rate the 600,000, if you know what I mean. But I can, yeah, I would imagine, but I can come back to Karen or Russell. I can ask and just confirm that. But essentially the bulk of what is being rated for the Secretariat and the Joint Committee is already being rated anyway. Yes, yes. Okay, so two things. You raised the fact that in the draft framework, it didn't identify in the Eastern Corridor what percentage of growth was of that Eastern Corridor growth was in the Wairarapa. So that is now in the updated growth framework document in two places. So I've put that in. I think you, and again, I get my council meetings muddled up because I've been to a few of them. So if it's incorrect, excuse me. But I thought you made mention that there was no mention of the Wairarapa in the regional growth framework, and then someone said there was like 200 mentions of it or something to that point. Okay. Yes. Yep. So I have made, so the Wairarapa is mentioned lots of times. I have added into the growth framework, we've identified the percentage of growth in that corridor that is in the Wairarapa. I think from memory, it's 1/3 of the growth in that corridor. Yeah, and I guess the other point I would make is I don't work for the Regional Council, so this isn't the Regional Council making that judgment or not. Yes. Yeah. Are you talking about the current WRS committee? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess from an economic development point of view, at the moment there is a WRS committee, and I'm not 100% sure what the Wairarapa representation is, but it's heavily loaded with Wellington City Council councillors, because that's where most of the funding comes from. The joint committee doing regional economic development and regional economic recovery, your mayor will sit at the table. You know, you'll have one representative at the table, as for Wellington and every other council. So from an economic development participation point of view, you're probably getting, you know, more of a voice than you currently do. Okay. Yep. Yeah, so both of yours have probably had different levels of participation in both the regional growth framework and discussions on the joint committee. So Rangatane, we did a board meeting in end of October, talked about the regional growth framework and the joint committee, and Ngāti Kanunu, Dave Smith has been quite active in the level of work, say, that Russell does at the regional growth framework. I haven't, so I'm now currently starting discussions with each of the 7 iwi about essentially 2 questions. One is, do you want to join the joint committee? And secondly, who is your nominee? So these are informal discussions, because we can't formally ask them to join until we actually have a joint committee. So we need, you know, we can't do that till we've got all the council signed up. So, yeah, your 2 on the side of the Wairarapa are still on my list to talk to about that. But you know, the ones I've spoken to date, Ngāti Toa and Port Nicholson, for instance, are very enthusiastic and see the benefit as iwi of sitting around the table with 10 mayors or 9 mayors and a chair and 3 central government entities, 3 central government ministers. Hi. So 2 things with funding. So Greater Wellington rate is to fund the Secretariat staff and the joint committee. So that's payment to the independent chair and payment to ensure that iwi can sit around the table. At the moment, funding for projects that come out of the regional, out of the regional growth framework in particular, will come from a mix of local government and central government entities. Yeah, I mean, I had very similar question about the regional growth framework. Like, what happens if we do the regional growth framework? This was before the last election, and the government changes. The response at that time is that this is the regional growth framework component, but I guess the same will be true of economic development at some point. This is the plan that we have agreed as a region, and I guess if we've still got 3 waters problems, if we've still got transport problems, if we're still having to deal with climate change, then, if the government changes, as a region, we're having conversations with the next government about those things, and they might not want to do it at the same speed, but as far as I'm concerned, it would still exist. But, I can't, yep. Yep. Okay, so from a regional, so just to separate the two again, so from a regional growth framework, they're totally in the regional growth framework because Levin is now part of the housing, employment and transport markets. I mean, since when we started that piece of work, and it continues, the Wairarapa and the Horowhenua are where the housing growth is in the region. And I mean, you'll appreciate it. People kind of move further out for housing. From a transport point of view, so from Okakotai's point of view, their state highway doesn't, just stop at Pauparam, for instance. So yeah, they're totally now part of the housing and urban form market, if you like. So funding, so they know, and I've told them, you're right, they don't pay if the Secretariat and the Joint Committee is funded. So we have to work out, they know they all have to pay an amount to cover their part of the Secretariat in the Joint Committee. Haven't worked out what that is yet, but they're fully aware of that, and I'm sure they've got that in their budgets. In terms of projects, as I've said, that'll be funded by local government and central government. They know they have to contribute to those projects. So if we do a piece of work on kind of regional climate change planning that includes all those councils, they know they have to pay. Yep. That's right. So you're the second council actual meeting. So Carterton had these at the end of January. And then so if you're talking about at the councillor level, I've had a couple of workshops only at council. So I've done one at Horowhenua and one at Wellington. I think councillors totally get the Joint Committee sitting, having regional conversations with central government and iwi. I think mayors in particular who sat around, as your mayor mentioned, with those meetings of central government, are very clear that the central government messaging is that's how they want to participate. I think the most concern from councils is about 2 things, I think. One is, will this be taking away something from us? And you had a question earlier on about local democracy, and the answer is no. And now I've completely forgotten what the second one is, yeah, sorry, I've remembered it now. The second one is more about, well, what happens when we've got a joint committee, and how do we as a council kind of participate in that work. And so just to talk to that a bit, in case that's one of your concerns. So the joint committee that your mayor would sit on, for instance, would sign off a 1 and a 3 year work program, you know, so that central government, local government, iwi, it would sign off the funding. Work would then start. It would pass through, you know, a CE's forum, senior group of people, like the meetings Russell goes to now. It would go to a joint committee as a draft document. But then I think quite a lot of the work will then go back to each council for endorsement. So if, for instance, we're doing a piece of climate change work about, well, where over the next 30 years should we stop building and stop retreating and that kind of stuff, then the draft might be signed off by the joint committee, but it would go back to your council and every other council and central government and iwi for endorsement. So much like we did with the draft framework, you know, it wouldn't just go to a joint committee and they'll go, great, thanks, good, we'll all do that without any input from councils. Yeah, so those are probably the main ones. Yep, yeah. Well, I mean, I would like to think in a perfect world, you know, if we've got a joint officers group, a joint CEOs group, like we do now with the regional growth framework, then a lot of that stuff will have been nutted out, or we would have had workshops with you like we have on other things, you know, so that it's not new to you when you get it, but totally it would give you the ability to do that. Yes, it will replace, so at the moment there's the Wellington Regional Strategy Committee that does economic development. So the proposal is that that will be disestablished at some point. Yeah, so it will replace that one. I mean, the joint committee, I wouldn't recommend this early on, but it also has the ability to think over time about are there any other joint committees or things going on that could come under this umbrella. So we considered, for instance, CDEM, you know, Civil Defence Emergency Management. We considered the Regional Land Transport Committee, but they both have specific bits of legislation that at the moment mean you can't put them in this joint committee. But the joint committee, you know, could argue, for instance, the central government, that it would make total sense to put the Regional Land Transport Committee under this. You mean like subcommittees of the joint committee? Yeah, because if you look at the draft, well, I'm speaking from the point of view of what I think you can do rather than what the law says, what a lawyer might tell you. But if you look at the draft agreement, the terms of reference, it does say that there is the ability to review that from time to time. I suspect, but again, I'm not the lawyer here, that you know, if it wanted to set up a subcommittee to do something totally different, then that would need to go back around the councils, background all the parties who signed up to that. But perhaps if it wanted to set up a subcommittee for regional economic development, it might not, because that's already in its mandate. Yeah, I agree. Having worked in local government in this region for decades, I would agree. So the regional growth framework is being consulted on at the same time as the LTP. So all the councils have endorsed the regional growth framework. We're using council's LTP processes to consult on the regional growth framework. We're not consulting on the joint committee. The only consultation relevant to the joint committee is GW consulting on the rate that we talked about before for funding. So we're not, and we don't need to consult with people on the joint committee. No, and we can't go to cabinet until everyone signed it off, so we don't want to wait 8 weeks for that. No, that's all right. All right, thank you all very much. Okay, bye.
Now after that blast of resolutions. Oh yeah, that was. So now adoption is C2, adoption of the Wairarapa Solid Waste Management and Minimisation Bylaw 2021. So we're now considering the report C2. Do we have a movement to receive the report in front of us today and the report from the policies working group as outlined and recommendations related to it? Councillor Plummer, seconded Councillor Maynard. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. All those against, the motion is carried. So council have been passed the joint regional process to get consistency on solid waste bylaws. Councillor Enns, Vickery and Colenso have attended the hearings and deliberations on our behalf. So one of you like to give us an overview of the hearings and deliberation process and how the Wairarapa Policy Working Group can make recommendations.
Yeah, it was just it was myself, not. Yeah.
Okay, that was Councillor Vickery, it was Councillor Plummer.
Yeah, that says Garrett. We're closely working group, or are we?
Yeah, it was Garrett, myself, and Pam.
Who would like to
Pam.
say?
Yeah.
I could start.
Yeah.
I saw the other two will put some bits in. I think this has been backwards and forwards to us a number of times, and we've had the hearings and we've had the deliberations. And I think the thing that came out of, or one of the things that stood out for me with the with the submissions and the deliberations was the support through the public and through those that submitted for this in the format that we now have, and the fact that there are recommendations in here to continue to review this policy and to have more input over time is going to make this a working and living document rather than something that's be all and end all. The people holding events wanted a smaller number of events to trigger having to do a waste plan for an event. And I think that encouraging, because we didn't want to reduce the number because it covers the other areas as well, the fact that we're going to promote doing these things, putting in waste plans for smaller groups, and doing a lot of education and things like that, both in the event and the building construction industry or sectors. I think that this is going to get the buy-in from those groups and businesses to continue to look at ways to minimise their waste and things like that. I think the rest of it is all there for reading, and I would certainly support what the position we've got to it at today's date.
Just to carry on from where Pam got up there, there was a certain amount of comment, but a lot of it was aspirational, and we'd like to do and should be doing and could be looking forward to, which we would agree with. The other thing I wasn't aware of until the discussion started, we're actually a lot of this has been jointly agreed between the other councils. So therefore, if the Wairarapa decided to go out on a limb, for example, on the size of events, that wouldn't have given a joint approach to the whole thing. So I was quite keen looking, for example, at some of the larger events down here. They should be actually activating the plan requirement previous or like after that. So we have formed in line with what the rest of the district's doing. The other one was, of course, certain amount of concern was unaddressed mail, and we noticed a comment from Councillor West about that. Undefined at this stage, but was concerned that inserts, for example, in newspapers, was that unsolicited mail, or was it addressed mail, or was it actually part of the publication? So there's a certain grey area in some of those places which we need to look at going forward. But in terms of a step forward, I think it's a great start.
And I think adding to that was the fact that a lot of the inserts into paper, into the weekly newspapers, is not recyclable material, and it was promoting using recyclable materials for those inserts to at least get that to be able to be recycled rather than forming rubbish.
I think the other concern, which we did raise, was for the South Wairarapa, there's a larger rural sector, and a lot of that stuff is delivered by RD1, so it's not actually, it just goes to an RD1 box rather than to personalised address. So it's an area for us to consider.
Can I ask either Garrick or Pam a question? I was interested in the use of glass rather than being sent up to Auckland to be reused here. Was there any discussion around costs, or was that very aspirational, or was that achievable? Because they were talking about using the glass to be used by food and Hogan, the roads.
Yeah. At this stage, I'd say aspirational.
I think if you look at the mayoral report, there is an item on that.
Maybe that's something to think about.
No, I was going to raise the unaddressed mail one. Oh, sorry. Like about so. Yeah.
I'm consulting during the meeting.
But yeah, look, I agree with Pam and Gareth. It's aspirational. It's more about encouragement and education rather than big stick stuff. And it is up for review in 2 years. There's a working group on terms of rubbish recycling and so on in 2 years. And there's a number of points here that we raised that are going to be looked at separately in those. So as a first step, this is the right way to go.
It's a moving beast, as Pam
Yeah.
said, you know.
Councillor Rose.
I'm kind of like surprised that with our event management, that we have really incorporate a waste management plan.
Well, I know with a number of events we already do.
Yes.
And I think event organisers realise that things will go smoothly. The smoother if they do that, and I know that my experience when Garrett was running, or not managing, but coordinating 121 festival, they had a waste management plan, even though they were not required to do so. Agreed. And while it didn't work necessarily, some good learnings for them out of it because it was the first time they'd done this. So I think that's going to be the norm anyway.
I think if you look at what Rotary did for the Rotary Fair for February this year, they went round and they covered all the rubbish bins that were in the square. So people could not put their rubbish in there. They provided no rubbish bags or anything. They provided recycling for glass and paper and things like that. But everyone was encouraged to take their rubbish away. And I didn't see anything afterwards. The place was just so tidy afterwards.
We had asked for some typical models of policy going forward, and certainly 121's happy to supply those, and the racecourse is happy. I haven't spoken to Rotary, but I think they will as well. But I think we need some documents which we can give to our own South Wales.
And it might come out,
Yep.
as a council, we provide rentable recycling apparatus to make it easier for them to pop that on their forklift and send it over to them. So that's something we can look at in the future as well.
That could be included in our event policy and actually document the event application document. So,
And I think that's the general idea, is there's some standardised documents for everybody to use. I think the other big thing is that we will be able to, because contractors and people are going to be licensed, then there will be a certain amount of data coming back. And from that, we will be able to ascertain what is actually going into landfill and what is actually being recycled and what percentage of the rubbish collection that all covers. And that's going to be huge, considering they're saying that Glen is starting to get full and they'll be looking for other landfills and things like that. So having an understanding of what our waste consists of and how we do recycling and things like that out of what people dispose of is going to be huge going forward.
To go on with what Pam's saying, which I totally agree with, but we're reacting to an environment where we're actually receiving the plastics that you buy something online and it's just littered with plastic or it's littered with unrecyclable stuff. So it's almost like we're inheriting a problem, but having to react to it at a local level.
But I think what you're doing is you're highlighting a central government issue. You're right, we actually are the end cope-up with it. But to go to a supermarket and say no non-recyclable plastics is a central government issue.
Yeah, I think it's really hard as well. We're trying to keep our watching what it is that we're putting through the recycling, and then every single time you buy any kind of meat, it's all on that you're not meant to be able. And it's to me, I always rinse them anyway before I throw them out. But I don't understand why that can't go in with the other plastics, But it's because it's head food
There was one,
and people don't always wash them. So, yeah, I understand why, but it's frustrating.
The contents of their plastic.
Yeah.
That cannot be.
Yeah.
there was one thing
Stop
that
using
I was disappointed from a Wairarapa perspective was with regards to the value of works prior to demolition of being $2 million. So, and I understand though in resolution 5C that we with a view to reduce the value. But what you do have is situations where you have demolition occur before there is actually a plan for replacement.
That's
That's not
very
captured.
thing. Yeah.
But I preferred the initial draft, which was any building over 100 square metres required a waste minimisation plan. And I'd like to, whilst we don't want to be making changes here, I'd like us to look at in the future moving towards that sort of concept. Because the reality is that except for
We did talk about, we discussed this in quite a lot of detail, and whether councils can make minor adjustments to suit council specific. So what they've done is they've tried to do this across the region, and there was certainly comment that councils could make tweakings within their own councils, within their own regulations, I suppose, for want of a better term, but not changing the bylaw.
So I'd like to highlight that for us.
Well, there was a magic number, so the building consent, the magic number was $2 million. So if you're over $2 million worth of construction, you have to have it at least of $2 million.
But we can submit on that to the combined district
Yeah,
plan,
yeah.
so that we can have some of these things into the combined district plan.
But that doesn't change the resolutions we have.
No,
No, it doesn't. And just to cover your point, Brendan, about plastics, given that this is a regional wide bylaw, it adds a lot more power to the region to lobby central government in terms of plastics and recyclables and so on. Whereas if we did it as individual councils, going back to your very comment about all the different territorial authorities, it's a lot less potent, I suppose.
That's also a good point possible to bring through LGNZ as a remit to put pressure on central government to change.
Which I think they're already examining it anyway. They're already doing it, and there were a lot of it is encouragement of supermarkets, which are probably the vast majority of the problem.
Can I just ask a question of clarification? I may have missed this in the report or previous discussions, but I'm thinking about, and it possibly isn't actually covered properly here, but the collection of the wheelie bins and the waste that's actually in people's personal wheelie bins. It doesn't appear to be something which are we regulating that just as an offensive trade, or are we touching this through here? Because there just seems to be some gaps in my view about actual management with that in here.
they'll have to become licensed.
So they still have to be licensed as an offensive trade separately. So this bylaw will just be the overall stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
This will be in addition to that.
We need to reference that in this then still and make it clear, because if you're running an offensive trade, that's one thing, but those people are directly having an impact on this bylaw as well for two reasons. One is they're contributing to the waste stream, and secondly, there's a direct link in here that talks about the public health considerations, particularly under the Health Act, of course, around the generation of nuisances.
Is it offensive or was somebody?
Well, it's specifically covered under the Health Act and offensive trade. And if you have an offensive trade, you have to be registered. But the second part to that is you must maintain your business in such a way that doesn't give rise to a nuisance. But it's just kind of this section 5.1.3 in the report sort of sits a little out to the side without having direct reference, I think, to that. Just saying, I might be wrong.
There are specific provisions within the bylaw to deal with offensive waste, offensive collection of waste.
But not this one.
There are in these provisions.
Can you show me where they are? Because I keep missing them.
Spoke about as nuisance, so not creating in section 15, clause 15, nuisance and litter. That's actually having litter that is offensive. We've talked about in the recommendations, of course, the providing education around the the alignment with offensive trade
Okay.
licensing. Definition of nuisance includes anything offensive or injurious to health.
That's right.
For the purposes of the Health Act. Clause 8.3, the occupier or the manager of the premises must ensure that the contents of any approved receptacle do not seep as to be injurious and dangerous to health, cause an offensive smell, or be a source of litter.
That's right. My mistake. I didn't read sufficiently the
That's
detail.
okay. And then 8.4, it talks about having people who are unsanitary or offensive condition. So they're not. They're an aside, I guess, an adjournment to the offensive trade provisions.
It's okay. My apologies.
Councillor Gibson, just one point I was going to make before. I mean, this is a moving piece, things change all the time, but what Pam actually said was this is a living document. So you're able to tweak, I understand, and particularly from Melissa's comment, you're about to tweak the changes that are coming about. I mean, there's a lot through the Climate Change Commission report. And that came out obviously after this.
I think that this will be reviewed both by the Wellington Regional Waste Minimisation Group, and then it will come down. This document will be reviewed every 3 years, won't it? The bylaw.
5 year.
5 years for a bylaw.
Well, I'm just sort of wondering, is that too far away?
So if it's a living document, 5 years.
5 years, yeah.
Well, should be.
5 years will go very quickly.
So for the bylaw provisions themselves, of course, there are the resolutions that each council can adopt underneath those, and we want to be being consistent across the Wairarapa councils around those. We have noted in an earlier report that, particularly in South Wairarapa, we want to give consideration to the collection and placement of bin receptacles, because we know that's an issue, particularly for people who are only here on the weekend and then leaving those out of all nuisance that they may create, but we haven't got sufficient evidence at the moment for that, so we need to actually provide some more evidence of the size of the problem, and that also works in with the broader provision of our solid waste management, which we will be considering that as part of next year's rating review, the impact on that on rates.
Sorry, just picking up on something you said, were you talking about the bins, the physical structure of the bins being a nuisance, or after they've been emptied being a nuisance?
Physical bins, particularly in Martinborough, which is incredibly windy. Oh, that's quite windy. Probably less prevalent number of bins that are left out effectively. So we have some provisions in there, but we have considered that there might be need to have more provisions, and particularly around Greater High Street. I know that there's an informal agreement there about the times that the bins are out, just because I guess the nuisance that might be caused for the bins all being out on that roadway where all the shops are. So that's something.
So we can tweak the resolution.
So if you look at 10.2 in the actual thing, it talks about the council may specify any place, blah, 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 where it can be, and the controls and how long it can sit there and so on and so forth. So we can make rules within the rules that suit, it might be different for Featherston to Breakdown, for example, because of the wind or whatever. So we can tweak according to circumstance.
I think that becomes part of your registration process with your offensive trade as well. Because, for example, if someone's only getting their bin full of grass and dog droppings collected every month, when that is picked up, that is offensive and is an unmanaged element. You can see blobs of nuisance material around town. Didn't I put that well?
I'm not sure the dog would consider it material.
Right. So are we happy to go through with the resolutions now?
Yeah.
So I'm not going to read them out because there's so many, but I'm going to take them as read. So do we have a mover with regards to recommendation 3, the adoption of the final Wairarapa solid waste management and minimisation bylaw? And we're also noting clause 6 interpretation changes. Have you all read that? Mm-hmm. Okay, moved Councillor Plymouth, seconded Councillor Lorenzo. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. All those against, the motion is carried. And councillors, are you happy to consider recommendations for A to J as one block? Or would you like to take them individually? Right. Do we have a mover for recommendation 4, agreeing to the following recommendations A through to J? Thank you very much.
He's lost his name.
Councillor Blimmer, Councillor Foxy.
He's lost his name. Bring your name to it.
All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
All those against, the motion is carried. And now we'll consider the second set of recommendations from the policies working group. Number 5. I'll take 5 as read, 5A through to C. The recommendations made by the Wairarapa Policy Working Group. Do we have a mover for that? Councillor Blimmer, seconded Councillor Maynard. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
All those against, the motion is carried. Right. Thank you, guys. We now move on to action items. Do we have a mover to receive D1 action items report? Thank you.
Councillor Fox.
Sorry?
Nothing.
Seconded. Thank you, Councillor Fox. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
All those against, the motion is carried. Councillors, do you have any questions you want to ask of 2 officers we have here today?
Yeah, Karen, can I just ask about the first one, the terror reduction? How are we getting on with releasing those documents? It's
Yes, we are still considering that. Can't say any more at this stage, unfortunately.
yeah, it is sort of dragging on a little bit, and I suppose we need to work on it a little bit.
It is actively in progress. Is all I can say. And we will, as soon as we can report and make those public, we will do that.
So it is actively in
It's
progress,
actively, it's
in
not just
moving.
in progress and sitting around.
Actively in
somewhere,
progress.
it's actively in progress.
I've got one, we haven't got any numbers attached to this, but regarding the summer reading program and the Eastern and Central Community Trust, I heard that they are not going to fund it at all from now on, so if it needs to be continued, we need to consider it as a council and look at other funding for that, I think.
What number is that, sorry?
So the,
So it's raised on 25th of November 20.
Page 122.
Oh, you're on, yeah. So I don't know whether it's too late to be putting that to the LTP or whether it's, I think that's been an important part of Wairarapa literacy for 23 years that they've been funding it. It would be a shame to see that go fall by the wayside.
I presume they've been funding across the Wairarapa as
They've
well.
been funding it all across the lower North Island, which is extraordinarily long.
So do we know how much it's cost for South Wairarapa?
I think I had a conversation, it was about 25,000 for the libraries.
We can follow up with the library manager. on
That would be great. I think because it's changed
Yep.
as opposed to highlighting other numbers. We get,
If you tell me that's right. Needs to continue.
Yeah, with all the other disasters in our education, that's the last thing we want to see drop off.
Also on
They won't even be able to read the maths questions. Let alone answer them.
kind of community buildings, I think the Anzac Hall is complete. And the Featherstone War Memorial will be finished in 1 week, I think. Yeah, apparently it's all required sign off from an engineer to.
Recent timeline from you on page 123 about the Featherstone wastewater consent. There are a number of letters at the end of that document with no conclusion, saying they're going to come back to us and tell us. Do we know we were up to on that, progress on that?
Did we not get a letter just recently?
The letter was, it's in process. Don't get that.
No. I think Rob read the whole, I mean, just recently.
I think we've read the letter, but it hasn't been sent.
No. We've had an update on the timelines, where it sits, when it gets to the GW.
Yes. But we don't know what happened.
Okay.
Because in the comment signed off by Stephen Wright,
Yeah.
Featherston will continue to operate using the 2012 consent, which is on hold. Does that mean the 2017 is still on hold?
I don't know where the hell I've seen that. Oh, yeah, the bottom of this, the timeline.
My reading of that, Garrick, is that the original application, which we were seeking to replace with a new application, the original consent application, the one that allows us to continue to discharge still remains intact, but the one that caused the furore has been withdrawn.
But we don't know that.
That's my reading of it.
Okay, so,
We've been asking for confirmation.
okay, could I make a comment on that? So could I just make a comment on that? I think that's a absolute red herring, and we keep coming back to it. This council has already voted that is going to be withdrawn, unanimously was withdrawn. So to all intents and purposes, it is dead and buried. It is gone.
I quite agree.
And you're arguing about an administrative issue that actually makes no bearing, because as far as the council is concerned, it is dead and buried. We are progressing down another one. When the actual physical piece of paper is withdrawn from Wellington Regional Council, doesn't mean anything, because the council has already voted that it's dead and buried. And that's what you should be explaining to people who are raising it. From the council's perspective, dead and buried. Don't get sidetracked by a red herring.
Further, my view is that Councillor Hems is no longer conflicted, because that which he submitted on has been withdrawn by resolution.
That is my point. If it's been withdrawn, then I no longer have a conflict.
Okay, it has been withdrawn. It is withdrawn. As far legally, it is gone, dead and buried, because the council has voted on it. It's gone.
So it's not going to continue. However, if it has to remain technically in place in order for Wellington, we would continue to flush their toilets, then we will continue in place, but it is not going to progress.
So I think you're chasing a red herring a little bit there. It's dead and buried as far as the council is concerned, whilst there might be some administrative issues to actually dealing with it on a practical day-to-day stuff. It is not being progressed. It has got no more, and we've started down the process of a new consent.
Very divisive. Anyway, do we have any further comments on the?
Are you happy with that? Okay. Sorry, I just want to make sure you have.
Recorded.
Yeah, no, well, it has been recorded. We know it's been recorded, and so it's a matter of just saying to the people who are raising this with you, it is done. It is over. Don't worry about the fact it might be sitting on a website somewhere. Yeah. Okay, and that relieves you, if you're, as Ross said, relieves you of your conflict.
Excellent. So shall we move on to the mayor's report? Sorry, that's Ross.
I'm having some IT issues, sorry. Like I'm having some significant IT issues.
So shall we move on?
Yes, yes, we should.
So there's my report there. I got for Barb to do my other meetings and engagement. So you can see that it's a relatively complete on page 140 and 141 of what I've been doing. And then there was probably 4 meetings that I thought worthy of raising. A few others regarding cobblestones. That will be handled by our representative, Alan. I'm on the board and I've met with him. But really, there is just to let you know, I've brought advisor caution on any future expansion plans until they have a definitive answer with regards to future rents on cobblestone with the trust, as opposed to having had the rent holiday now confirmed for a couple of years to launch into major capital projects. The second one is Urban. Now, this is with regards to a comment that you may know that I'm walking down, is the ability to use public land on leasehold to allow for affordable housing. And that whilst it's just a heads up that there will be a report being done by Uber Urban Pro Bono for us. They're an Auckland company that did Pegasus Village in Christchurch, amongst other ones, with regards to how we might be able to look at essential and local government combining to provide affordable housing. So just more on that, just to let you know that I'm doing that. And I think there is should be, yes, there we go, just a 2-page overview on what they're working on.
And it's very encouraging, Alex.
Yeah.
This is innovative. I'm surprised central government isn't doing it themselves. But I'd like to see more on this.
Interesting, it was very common in the 1890s and 1900s when we were established in New Zealand, and for exactly the same reasons. Anyway, so we also had a Wairarapa Mayor meeting where we have approved Adrian Young Cooper to now be the head of the Wairarapa Economic Development Strategy Group, with Dame Margaret Baisley retiring. And we're going to take her out for dinner to thank her for all the years of unpaid support that she's given us. Adrian Young Cooper is the chair of Auckland Transport, chair of the Queenstown Airport, was involved in the Cornwall Trust in Auckland, which is also leasehold land, amongst other things. And we're very lucky that she has just built a house in South Wairarapa and has agreed to be non-paid in this role.
That's good.
And the other one is, which is, I think, Lee, you mentioned with regards to, at the moment, all our waste, it's bugged me from day one, LT is trucked up to Auckland for crushing, which is madness, in my opinion, with regards to the diesel and the cost associated with that. And really, we should have a glass crushing capability within the South Wairarapa. So really it's more I'd like to raise this and ask council officers to comment on how that would work within our current contracts with our current waste providers, and whether that could be removed and brought into, at no cost to council, but that resource diverted through to a private operator. I've also spoken with Fulton Hogan, and they have agreed that they will take as much glass waste as we can and use that as part of their roading. I've spoken with a number of vineyards, and they would also use that glass with regards to weed suppressant amongst the vines.
Weed suppressant.
Sort of way of looking at our wine bottle. Okay. I've also had a chat with the Mayor of Wellington, and he is very interested in also providing the product if we got this up.
Is there any, I'm assuming there is standards of or size that this grass gets crushed down to?
Yeah. This is all something that is, we would let a provider look at what the costs are associated with that, and whether we can remove quite a chunk of our solid waste into something that's costing us nothing to get rid of. So we're just going to go through the exploratory. I'm just letting you know I have to have an approach from Melanie Contracting, and whether or not there's an ability for him to get access to the stuff we're currently shipping to him.
Would that be regional wide?
At the moment, it's South Wairarapa.
Just us.
But we would certainly, let's look at the numbers and whether we go to say the Castle and Marston. I know, like I said, Wellington, Andy Foster was very interested in saying, let us know how that goes.
He won't get it through council.
No. It's just like forward comments like that comes to when I recognise.
So reprobated.
Potentially, this could be not just cost neutral, but we could have a positive gain financially out of this if in the longer term, if we
Not if there's a resource and there's a demand and a use for it, then certainly who knows what the thing is.
Well, what it may mean is we get collection for nothing.
Yeah,
well, that's what I'm thinking, yeah.
So, but it's possible. We own our waste, it's our problem. We should be dealing with it, not putting it on a truck.
Have they given any data to indicate what the uptake of the recycled glass has been in roading projects around the rest of the country?
No, I spoke with the CEO of Pulse and he said we are definitely interested, but I'm not sure whether or not that is carried through into other councils. And then their operations manager said, let us know when we're up and running and we will use that as part of our mix.
There have been trials of using the glass and modem.
Well, it's both within the aggregate and within the seal.
Yeah.
They've actually used it in the airport as part of their.
But we need to know whether or not it's going to compromise council on its contracts with Aircare.
Yeah.
So in order to move this on, should I suggest a resolution that council officers consider the feasibility of this matter and report back to council?
Well, I was going to suggest an action plan, but I mean,
Consider feasibility plans.
Can you just clarify for me, Melnick Contracting, are they the company that?
they live here in Marlborough.
Melnick Contracting. So it's a Melnick local contractor trucks in Martinborough. So he approached me.
Okay, thank you.
Interesting.
And with that, have we got any other comments, guys?
Are you going to put the motion or can we go move on a second for the motion?
So, all right. So we've also got the, of course, the resignation of the recent appointee to the Destination Wairarapa Board. So, are you comfortable with me to appoint a representative again, which is very crucial at this point in time? And I'd probably just a quick discussion on whether the list of previously agreed potential candidates, of which there are only 2 others, or whether you, because I have had an expression of interest from someone else, whether you'd like those brought to me or whether you'd like me to email around with regards to suitability rather than go through a council meeting to appoint. How would you like this to be done?
I think you should flick it around. You know, have another 8 weeks to meet them.
Okay, so then do we have a mover to delegate to the mayor the authority to appoint an SWDC representative to the Destination Wairarapa Board following consultation with councillors by email? Yeah. Seconded Councillor Hay. All those in favour please say aye. Aye. All those against, the motion is carried. I declare the meeting.
With regards to the last pressure, I mean, we've highlighted the Milteak, but shouldn't we be prudent and get?
Oh, no. This is, you know, it's being raised by.
All right.
It might be that there's 100 people that come to and say.
There are a couple of companies out there.
We the crushers and all decide to see.
No, there are a couple of companies
There
from
are
New Zealand.
multiple, certainly we're not saying that nobody gets that contract. Totally.
Cool, I just want to make sure that.
Yeah.
Officers will consider that as part of it. If we have a resolution for officers.
Yeah.
Just slow down.
So do we have a mover that the council officers consider the financial, how do you want that phrase?
Feasibility or?
Consider the feasibility of glass crushing being incorporated into the South Wairarapa.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Any two.
Excellent.
Current contract comes up for renewal.
We've got 5 years to go.
Yeah.
All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
All those against, the motion is carried. Before I close.
Before you close. You've sent out a number of emails to us over the last month or so of different meetings you've been to, and you made a couple of comments on them saying, yeah, this has an impact upon local governments and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Is it appropriate that we bring those to the forum here to talk about, do you think, or not?
If there's a decision that affects council you feel needs to be discussed, a lot of these, say you're talking about rural banking, for instance, is that?
No, I was talking about, you went to a mayoral, or something came out of central government about governance for the wards, for example. So the extension letter that came from the minister about reconsidering wards, for example, those are probably issues that need to be raised in public because the public won't read it, because we've already passed a resolution that we're not going to consider it this term. the minister has extended them to, you know.
At some point that it becomes an issue for council to consider, then it would certainly come onto our agenda. But at the moment, it is up in the air until a law is passed. And then when that law is passed, it is a directive to local government. So
I suppose that my question on if we can talk about that particular one, is the minister sent out a letter extending the timeframe, is that correct? To the 20th of whatever the month
it's
was.
proposed.
Oh, I thought it was a done deal at this stage.
So that's a proposed extension under the Act going through under urgency. So we will consider that if and when it becomes work.
Okay.
And it would be for the next election. And we've already established that we need to do a significant amount of research and consultation on Māori laws, and particularly if we're removing the poll provisions, then we would need to do a lot of work up front. I'm not sure whether we would have the capacity to be able to do that.
So
I acknowledge that, but that change to local government is obviously going to be very public.
Yes.
Yes.
So it would be something we would have to then
but we need
bring
to
back
see
here
the shape of it
to review
when
it again.
becomes law, and then it will come to the public.
I just want to quickly touch on the conference. So did we all agree that,
Yes.
Gary and Gary?
Yeah. So we're just maintaining the current resolution with regards to attendance limits.
So who's going?
Gareth and Rebecca, we all agreed.
Yeah. That was originally the plan, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it was delayed because of COVID.
COVID, yeah.
I just wanted to make sure everyone was still comfortable.
I don't know.
Yeah. Where is it this time?
Hawaii.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I just.
It's in the letter.
Yeah, oh, you mean New Zealand, Hawaii?
You're welcome to. You two are welcome to go.
We will provide detailed report back.
Of exactly how much Garrett drank.
Either way,
All right, are we all good now, guys?
Yeah.
Right,
You all have to drink
I
Moa.
declare the meeting closed. That's it, don't give.
Hey! You have to drink Moa here.
Right, so we've got till
And wine, lots of wine.
1:30.
Are you going to wait till 1:30?
Oh, do we have to wait till 1:30 or?
So we've got till 1:30 for the workshop to begin.